Hello, friend. Chuck Bennett here. Common sense and common decency tell me that we have troubles ahead. America is at a dangerous crossroad, but I have faith in our better angels. Welcome to Letters from an American Optimist. Today's letter is dated November 19th, 2024. It's addressed to Americans who have real fear about the direction our country has taken. If you are one of those folks, if you are feeling exhausted, dispirited, or betrayed, I hope you will take a look at my letter from November 16th. It is titled Our Moment. It places this moment in American history. The coming struggle is the same faced by our ancestors, from Bunker Hill in Normandy to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I find it energizing to be shoulder to shoulder with those folks. As I talked about in that letter, we are facing a crisis, a counter-revolution that seeks to redefine America. In this letter, I will be talking about two possible trajectories that the new Trump administration will take us. Dear alarmed Americans, I hope you are finding time to rest and to gather your strength. I hope you are reaching out to friends and family that are as worried as you are. There is comfort in numbers, in knowing that you are not alone. As we look to the future, we are wondering, what can we do? My instinct as an old coach is to always go on the offensive, but that is not practical right now. We lost the election, and the ball is in their court. Neither should we go into a defensive crouch or imagine that we are helpless. First, we need to buoy our own spirits and those around us. We need to reach out to those who will suffer the first wave of attacks: immigrants, trans people, and soon enough other LGBTQ+ people and women. We need to read, think, and prepare. In order to make our plans, we need to envision what course events might take. I see two possible paths that this counter-revolution might take in the next few years. We must be ready to respond to both. Whatever appointments and proclamations are making headlines right now, these are but theatrics. It is the maneuvering behind the scenes over the next few months that will determine this country's direction. Before I get to the two paths, let's consider Donald Trump. We must understand he is not Hitler. Hitler had a vision that he set out in plain words. Anyone who took the trouble to read Mein Kampf knew exactly what Hitler and his followers would do. Trump has no such ideology. The first time around, his own staffers reported that he was most heavily influenced by Fox and Friends, a morning TV show. They said he often made decisions based on the last person he talked to. Ideas have coalesced around him, but not because they fit his vision. Those were simply the ideas that could get him elected. He is not driven by conviction, but by vanity. We know he is thin-skinned and holds grudges. With his newfound immunity, the width, depth, and breadth of whatever revenge he might take is unprecedented and frightening. But we also know he is an old man. As the campaign progressed, he deteriorated before our eyes. It is hard to imagine that he will have the energy to sustain much interest in the day-to-day running of the White House. Nevertheless, he will be the president. He and his MAGA base, that 800-pound gorilla, will be the fulcrum of this administration. Path number one. There are still plenty of conventional Republicans who have held their nose, or sold their soul, take your pick, and still support Trump. These are people like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. They have been trying to ride the tiger for years in order to keep their relevance. Conventional Republicans will recognize that they are inheriting a strong economy. If the administration can manage to sustain it, Republican control of the government can be locked in for the foreseeable future. Their goal will be to do just enough showy stuff to satisfy that gorilla, but not so much as to wreck the economy. People like Graham and Rubio represent an inertial weight that would swing the pendulum back towards normalcy. If this be the path, Trump's new administration will produce toxic results for America, worse even than their first time around. But the institutions and the basic shape of our government will still be there, damaged but repairable. Path number 2. Trump and his advisors actually do what they said they would do. For example, Elon Musk, Trump's economic guru, has a plan that he says plainly will tear down America's economy and create widespread hardship. He actually says this, but he promises to rebuild it better than ever. Like Twitter, I suppose. His assistant, Vivek Ramaswamy, wants to cut 75% of the federal government's workforce. I think it's clear both of these guys love their Marvel movies. Elon Musk, for years, has been trying to convince us that he is actually Tony Stark, and Vivek Ramaswamy, he's got a weird thing for Thanos. Robert Kennedy Jr. has wild, grossly misinformed ideas about science and how it works. How many people have died because they took his advice on vaccines? This is the man Trump wants to put in charge of our health care. Stephen Miller is Trump's advisor on Homeland Security. He bragged that the mass deportation he has planned requires internment centers that would be, quote, the largest infrastructure project in America. Imagine that. Egypt has its pyramids, Germany has its Autobahn. We would have internment centers. Musk is a dilettante. Ramaswamy is a brat, Kennedy a flake, and Miller, he's evil. But they are not the worst of it. Headline-grabbing appointments often lead to nothing of substance. Over the years, we have intentionally built inertia into the government to lessen the bad effects of wild swings in policy from one administration to another. That's why the biggest threat to American democracy is below the surface. The nameless staffers who worked in the first Trump administration have spent the last 4 years making plans in case they had the chance for a do-over. These are the true believers, the counter-revolutionaries. They will be going back to their old jobs, but this time they will have their own Mein Kampf to guide them. Project 2025 is an anti-democratic roadmap that will move our government towards authoritarianism. It will dismantle institutions and remove tens of thousands of civil servants, replacing them with political appointees. These are the elements that ensure our government's ability to transition from one election to another. With no ability to transition, democracy cannot exist. No, Trump is not Hitler, MAGA are not Nazis, or at least a great majority of them. But if you study German history of the 1920s and 30s, you will learn how Hitler and his cronies used democracy against itself. Within a decade, they transformed democracy into a savage, totalitarian government. The parallels to path number 2 are downright chilling. So what do we do right now? There is a spectrum of ways to affect political change, from letters to the editor on one end and armed insurrection on the other extreme. The path this administration takes will determine our place in the spectrum. If, as I hope, the second Trump administration takes path number 1, I think our response can be similar to how opposition has worked in the past, only more. I think the tamest version of their policies will prove disastrous. Trump, already a lame duck, will continue to mentally and physically diminish. MAGA's attachment is to him personally. As he fades from the scene, his followers will divide and argue among themselves. History has taught us this lesson over and over. On path number 1, democracy remains intact. Votes will decide the future. If, as I fear, the new administration takes path number 2, we will have to move further down the spectrum because votes will have lost their meaningful power. Let's be clear. I do not believe violence will be the answer. Not only do I oppose it on principle, I cannot imagine how violence would ever be helpful in this conflict. But I will be reading Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. Civil disobedience is within the range of the possible. As we await events, as the Trump administration readies itself, let us remember that thousands and thousands of children will lie awake tonight fearing the sound of a knock on the door. In America, for goodness sake. Thousands of trans folk are disconsolate and seeing few options for their future. And maybe, worst of all, we are surrounded by otherwise good people who know nothing of the banality of evil. So, let's hope for path number 1. It will be a hard enough journey, but we also need to get our minds right for path number 2. If our institutions cannot hold, our lives will take a different course than what we grew up expecting. Very respectfully, Chuck Bennett. For myself, I have already been adjusting my expectations for what my life would look like over these next years. I know that there have been times in our history when people writing essays like this were thrown in jail, or worse. Does this sound far-fetched? For the first time in our history, our president is above the law and can act with criminal impunity. He has said in plain language that he will use the power of the government against his enemies. Come to think of it, I may write a letter to John Adams and ask him about the Alien and Sedition Acts. It wouldn't hurt for you to Google them. For now, I am writing letters, and I have a lot of reading to do. I hear there's a march in Washington on January 18th. I plan on being there. It's a start. My next letter will be to Christians, specifically to Christians who voted for Trump in the second election. I hope you will find that episode. It's called Christians Still. If you want to like this or subscribe, well, that would be great. But even better, tell a friend. We need all the help we can get.